Now available in paperback and e-readers, E-Steam Ascension, The Devil's Dealer reaches a turning point in the life of this powerful E-Steam series story. Get E-Steam Ascension at online booksellers today. Over Thanksgiving week, I had a chance to take a look at Netflix's The Punisher, and I can honestly say that this is one of the better Marvel Studios adaptations, and it's way better than anything I have seen so far, after having to deal with the dreadful Defenders, the horrible Iron Fist, and the back six of Luke Cage, and that awful Spider-Man Homecoming. Now, I can take a look at this Netflix's The Punisher, and I can say it's one of the best adaptations of the Frank Castle character, and really captures the spirit of the Punisher comic book. Now, when it comes down to the Punisher, he's had numerous adaptations over the last 28 years. And while many production companies think it's easy to hit the target for translating a comic book about a guy with a bunch of guns who kills criminals into a movie, they always missed the mark. But thankfully, Marvel Studios was right on target with this web series, The Punisher. Now, Netflix's The Punisher picks up right after Daredevil Season 2, and Frank Castle has avenged his family and murdered all the criminals responsible for their deaths, or so he's believed. And now he's ready to move on. He's burned his Punisher vest with the iconic skull on it, and he's took a job at a construction site, and he's the quiet guy with the sledgehammer in the corner, who many people thought was a little crazy. And while he's breaking down a wall, he's doing with a symbolic wall that's keeping him stuck in this dead end in his life. And in that first episode, your Frank Castle is a man without a purpose or a mission. However, as this episode progresses, and several of his co-workers recruit this kid named Donnie into a plan to rob a mobster's poker game, Frank breaks down his mental wall, and he takes down the co-workers who are looking to kill this Donnie, and then eventually finds a purpose again. And that purpose is to go out here and mete out his own justice on these criminals out here. Now, the first episode did a great job of staying true to the Frank Castle character, and really did a good job of establishing Frank Castle from the comics and translating him from the comics to the screen. They really did a good job of laying out who Frank Castle was, what he wanted to do, and they really did a good job of giving us a reason to care about this Frank Castle character. We really saw him in a anti-hero type character, and they really did a good job of laying him out and showing us how rich and complex this Frank Castle character is. Now, in the second episode, they introduce us to the microchip character, or as they call him in this show, Micro, but the microchip character is core to the classic Punisher comics from the 1980s. He was Frank's right-hand man. He was the information broker who gave Frank all his intel, and he helped him get certain weapons that he would need for certain missions. And the relationship between Frank and Micro was really rocky in the beginning, but we start to see a lot of things being laid out as related to those classic Punisher comic books in this series. Now, there's some subplots in this series that I really am not too big a fan of. One of them features one of these Muslim federal agents, which really starts to have a little bit of a smell of an SJW onto it, and her angle about these incident in one of these countries. She's doing this investigation. And then we have this other subplot about Frank in his past, which was reminiscent of the CW's Arrow. And I'm not really too big a fan of it, but it all seems to blend in organically and seamlessly. And the prime focus is Frank Castle in this series and Frank Castle's life. And all we see is him as the main character of this series, and he's the primary focus of most of the action as it relates to this Punisher series. Now, when it comes down to this Punisher series, it is, again, one of the best adaptations of the character. This one really feels more like the Punisher comic book than any other adaptation I have seen so far. And I've sat down and I watched the 1989 Punisher with Dolph Lundgren, which is really campy and really cheesy, and really doesn't do a good job of giving us Frank Castle. It gives us Dolph Lundgren playing Frank Castle, but it doesn't really give us the richness and complexity that Frank Castle has as a character. Now, I haven't seen the Thomas Jane or the Ray Stevenson movies, but it could really, I don't think they could be on this level. This Netflix series is more like the comics than anything I have ever seen so far, and it really is one of the best Netflix series as it relates to these Marvel superheroes. It's really top quality, and I have to say that they really do a good job of bringing the grittiness of Frank Castle's world to life as it relates to New York today, because New York has changed a lot from the days when Frank Castle was created back in the late 1970s and 1980s. Now, back in the late 1970s and 1980s, New York was a literal hellhole, and it was so dark and gritty, and criminals were literally all over the place. And The Punisher was created after classic 1970s movies set in the grim and gritty New York, like Death Wish, which featured Charles Bronson, and the whole Dirty Harry series, which was set on the West Coast. But the prime focus of the Punisher, really, you could see it in movies like Death Wish as one of the inspirations. And the whole aspect of him being this Vietnam War vet who came back to an America which really did not give him any sort of respect or any sort of appreciation. And then when he comes to try to raise his family, the mob kills his family, and then he decides to go and mete out justice on those who the courts won't mete out justice on as the Punisher. So they do a very good job of bringing that grittiness and that darkness to the screen. And that's a real challenge when you take a look at New York City today, because New York City today is very different place. It's very clean. It's very, as some people call, gentrified, and it looks like a Disneyland to some people. So trying to find places where that grittiness is still there and that darkness is still there, that's a real challenge in finding those locations and making them look dark and gritty. But the production team on Netflix's The Punisher do an amazing job of showing us the dark, gritty world of Frank Castle and those seedy places that he goes to and those places that he has to go into to deal with these kinds of criminals. Now, they do a very, very good job of bringing that 80s style grittiness of grim and gritty 1980s, late 1970s New York to life on screen in this Netflix series. And I really applaud them for doing that, because I know how much of a major challenge it is, because many of those old gritty places like Hell's Kitchen here in New York, they've been so-called gentrified, and they no longer look like they used to back in the 1980s when I was going to Park West High School in Manhattan, because I used to walk down areas like 50th Street and 8th Avenue, 9th Avenue to go to school, and walk down blocks like 51st and places like that. So a lot of that grittiness is been gone for over 20 years, but they do a good job of bringing that to life in this Punisher series. And they create this amazing character who is downright compelling to watch, because after you watch one episode of The Punisher, you just feel compelled to watch more, because this character he draws you into his world, and he comes to life so incredibly. The actor who plays the Punisher just does an amazing job, and he commands the screen with every scene that he's in. He's very powerful and downright compelling in his performance, and it's one of the best performances I've ever seen in one of these Marvel Studios projects. I mean, this acting in this is really top notch, because for one guy to command the entire screen like that, it shows how strong an actor he is and how good his range is as related to playing this role. And this role is one of the most complex I have seen presented on in a Marvel Studios project. It has a lot of depth. And that's another thing I like about this whole Punisher series, is that it has a lot of depth to it. The story, in the episodes I've seen, they do great things, like with the whole wall thing. They show the symbolism of Frank Castle. He's trying to break this wall down that's physical, but it really relates to his mental wall and the purpose he wants to have in his life. And once he breaks through that wall, he then finds the purpose. And that was really a great thing that they did visually in showing some richness and depth to this character. And that's not something I've really seen in too many Marvel Studios projects, but they did a great job with this one. And when it comes down to this Punisher, it's one of the best adaptations I have seen of a Marvel character. I mean, it's right up there with Luke Cage in his first 6 episodes, and up there with 2008's Iron Man and Captain America, the First Avenger. This is how good this is, and it shows me what happens when Marvel Studios comes out with something that makes sure that they maintain the source material, respect the source material, and have some standards as it relates to their production values and relates to their product, because this is a type of product they need to be producing on the regular instead of trying to rush things out like they did with series like Defenders, Iron Fist, the back six of Luke Cage, and Spider-Man Homecoming, because when they rush, a lot of things get compromised, and when things get compromised, we really don't get the quality on the screen. Netflix's The Punisher really does a great job of, again, staying true to the character of Frank Castle, staying true to the spirit of the character, and it's just like watching a comic book come to life on screen. I highly recommend you check out Netflix's The Punisher. It is an incredibly compelling show, and it's an incredibly well done show that brings the bar back up for Marvel Studios and really shows what they can do when they sit down and pay attention to detail and maintain a high level of quality. Again, I highly recommend you check this series out. It's one of the best Marvel Studios projects produced so far, and it's worth checking out these episodes, and they're really binge worthy.